Dr. Michael Harris had spent his entire career studying the mysteries of space. A scientist by profession, he had always been fascinated by the unknown. For years, he had been working on a project that aimed to understand alien life forms. He had always dreamed of meeting an alien face to face, but he never expected it to happen in such an unusual way. One day, as he sat in his lab, surrounded by papers and equipment, a sudden light filled the sky. It wasn't like any meteor or aircraft he had ever seen. It was a bright, shimmering object, descending slowly toward Earth. Michael's heart raced as he watched from the window of his research facility. He knew this was no ordinary event. It was something extraordinary. The object landed softly just outside his lab. A strange, silvery glow surrounded it as it touched down, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Michael grabbed his coat and rushed outside. As he approached the landing site, his mind raced with questions. What was this? Who was aboard? The hatch opened, and out stepped a figure that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. She was tall, almost 7 feet, with smooth blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Her eyes were large and a deep shade of violet, glowing with intelligence. Her long silver hair flowed down her back like a river of light. She wore a simple outfit that looked both elegant and functional, and her presence was both calming and overwhelming at the same time. "Hello," the alien said in perfect English, her voice smooth and melodic. "I am Zira from the planet Cylon. I have come to Earth to learn about your species." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. This was a real alien, standing in front of him, speaking his language. He had read about encounters like this in books, but never in his wildest dreams did he think he'd be involved in one. Zira's eyes studied him with curiosity, as though she was waiting for him to react. "Welcome to Earth," Michael finally managed to say, his voice a little shaky. "I'm Dr. Michael Harris. It's an honor to meet you." Zira smiled gently, her violet eyes gleaming. "I understand that humans are quite advanced in many ways, but I seek to understand your species more deeply. I have heard much about your ways of reproduction, and I wish to learn more about it." Michael blinked in surprise. Reproduction. It was not something he had expected her to ask about. His first instinct was to wonder why an alien would be so interested in such a human matter. But the look in Zira's eyes showed genuine curiosity, not mockery or condescension. She seemed sincere. "Why do you want to know about reproduction?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I mean, humans and aliens. Our biology is so different. It's not something we often discuss with outsiders." Zira's expression softened. "I have studied the reproduction methods of many species across the galaxy, but humans are unique. Your emotional bonds, your complex interactions, they are unlike anything I've encountered. I wish to understand why reproduction holds such importance to your species. Perhaps I may even experience it for myself." Michael was taken aback. The idea of an alien wanting to experience human reproduction was beyond anything he had imagined. He thought about it for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Well," he said carefully, "human reproduction is not just about the physical process. There are deep emotional and social elements that are involved. It's very complex." Zira nodded, her eyes focused intently on him. "I understand. And that is precisely why I wish to learn from you. I have never experienced emotions in the way that you do, but I want to try. I want to understand the bond you humans share in such moments." Michael felt a wave of uncertainty. He had always studied alien biology and behavior, but this was different. Zira wasn't asking about simple facts or theories. She was asking to experience something deeply personal, something that humans shared with one another, something that could never be easily explained. For a moment, Michael wasn't sure how to respond. This was a scientist's dream, an opportunity to study an alien species in a way few had ever imagined. But it was also a deeply personal request. What would happen if he agreed? What would Zira truly learn from this experience? And more importantly, what would it mean for their growing relationship? Zira seemed to sense his hesitation. "I do not wish to cause discomfort," she said softly. "I simply seek knowledge, and perhaps, in the process, I may learn something about myself. If you agree, I will follow your lead, and we will proceed with great care." Michael took a deep breath, his mind racing with thoughts and questions. Could he really go through with this? He had always been driven by his curiosity and scientific ambition. But now, faced with this unexpected request, he felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to Zira, but to humanity as a whole. He couldn't let this be a simple experiment. It had to be something more meaningful. "Okay," Michael finally said, his voice steady despite the swirling thoughts in his mind. "We'll begin by explaining human reproduction, its biology, its emotions, its significance. But we'll take it slowly. You need to understand the complexities of it first." Zira's face lit up with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Dr. Harris. I am grateful for this opportunity." As they walked back to his lab, Michael couldn't help but wonder what this strange journey would bring. This was just the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: everything was about to change. Dr. Michael Harris and Zira sat in his lab, the space filled with scientific equipment and monitors. Michael had spent the last few days explaining the basics of human reproduction to Zira. He had shown her diagrams, explained the biology, and answered countless questions. But today, Zira seemed even more focused, her violet eyes full of curiosity. "Let's start with the basics," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. He had gathered several data screens showing human anatomy, hormone cycles, and the complexities of human reproduction. Human reproduction is a process that involves both the body and the mind. It's not just about physical connection, but about emotions and relationships as well. Zira nodded. She seemed eager, but also thoughtful, as if she were trying to fully understand what Michael was saying. "I have read much about your species. You say that emotion is an important part of reproduction. But how does that work?" "In my culture, reproduction is a purely biological act. There are no emotional connections, no bonds." Michael paused for a moment, thinking about how best to explain this. "Well, for humans, the emotional connection often makes the physical process more meaningful. It's not just about creating life. It's about sharing a deep bond with another person. Humans form relationships, build trust, and experience a range of feelings: love, joy, even vulnerability. These emotions are deeply tied to reproduction." Zira's large eyes widened. "So you do not simply reproduce to create more life. There is an emotional significance to it." "Exactly," Michael replied, his voice steady. "For many humans, the act of reproduction is a celebration of life, a way to connect with someone else on a very deep level. It involves trust, intimacy, and a willingness to share something personal. It's much more than just biology." Zira seemed to ponder his words for a moment. "I see. But what if there is no emotional connection? What if the act is purely physical?" Michael leaned forward slightly, sensing that Zira was really trying to understand. "Well, that's something different. While some humans may engage in physical relationships without emotional bonds, many believe that the true meaning of reproduction comes from the emotional connection. Without that connection, it can feel empty or meaningless for some people." Zira tilted her head, considering this new perspective. "In my species, we do not have such complex emotions. Our reproduction is purely for the continuation of our species. It is a very structured, clinical process. There are no feelings involved." Michael could see that Zira was fascinated, yet also a little puzzled by the depth of human emotions. He decided to share more about the human experience of connection and how it plays a role in reproduction. Humans often form bonds through shared experiences. The trust, affection, and sometimes even the struggles that people go through together all help to create that connection. It's a unique experience because every individual is different. No two human relationships are exactly the same. Zira's eyes sparkled with interest. "That sounds beautiful," she said softly. but also very complex. How do humans know if they are ready for such a bond? Michael smiled gently. For many, it's a personal journey. Some know when they meet the right person. Others take time to find that connection. It's a mix of emotional and physical readiness. It's not something that can be easily explained in just a few words, but when it happens, it can change a person's life. Zira was silent for a few moments, her gaze fixed on Michael, as though she were trying to absorb everything he was saying. Finally, she spoke again. I have studied human behavior, but experiencing it is another thing entirely. I want to understand it, Michael. I want to know what it feels like, not just what it looks like. Michael felt a mixture of surprise and hesitation. He had never expected that Zira would want to take it this far, to actually experience human emotions and relationships in such a personal way. But there was something in her voice, a deep, sincere desire to understand. She wasn't simply asking out of curiosity. She wanted to feel what humans felt. I understand your curiosity, Zira, Michael said slowly. But you need to understand that human relationships are very personal. It's not something to take lightly. You can't just experience it like a scientific experiment. It involves trust, respect, and a lot of emotional depth. It's not just about the physical act. Zira nodded, her expression serious. I understand. But I feel that this is the only way I can truly understand your species. I want to experience the connection you speak of. I want to know what it's like to feel those emotions, to understand why it is so important to you. Michael thought for a moment. He had spent so much time focusing on facts, figures, and theories about alien species, but now he was being asked to guide someone through an experience that was deeply personal, something that humans cherished, but also complicated. Could he really go through with this? He wasn't sure, but he knew that Zira's curiosity was sincere. All right, Michael finally said. We'll take things slowly. I'll guide you through every step. We'll talk about the emotional side first, then we can move to the physical side. But this has to be done carefully. It's not something to rush into. Zira's expression softened with a look of gratitude. Thank you, Michael. I trust you to help me understand. I will respect your pace. As they continued to discuss the nuances of human emotions and relationships, Michael couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something far bigger than he had ever expected. What would happen when Zira truly understood human emotions? And what would it mean for both of them, as individuals and as representatives of their respective species? For now, he could only continue to guide Zira, step by step, through the intricate world of human reproduction and the emotions that made it so significant. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was one that neither of them could have predicted. The days following their conversation were filled with learning and preparation. Michael had never imagined his life would take such an unexpected turn. One moment, he was a scientist studying the stars, and the next, he was teaching an alien about the complexities of human emotions and reproduction. Zira, despite her calm and composed nature, had an unquenchable thirst for understanding, and Michael found himself drawn into the challenge of explaining what had always been second nature to him. They continued their discussions in the lab, with Michael explaining everything from the role of emotions in relationships to the biological processes involved in reproduction. Zira absorbed everything eagerly, asking questions that showed not just curiosity, but a deep desire to understand. I've learned so much already, Zira said one afternoon, her violet eyes reflecting both wonder and deep thought. But I still don't quite understand the connection between emotions and the physical act. You say it's about trust and love, but how does that change the experience? Michael paused, taking a deep breath. He had explained the basics, how emotions like love and affection created bonds between humans. But Zira wanted more, and Michael wasn't sure how to explain something so abstract, so personal. Well, he began. Imagine you're with someone you care about deeply. You trust them completely, and you share a history together. That bond, that connection, makes everything feel different. It makes the experience more meaningful because it's not just about the physical. It's about sharing something important, something personal. Zira seemed to consider this. So it's not just the physical act of reproduction. It's the bond that makes it significant. Exactly, Michael replied. Humans believe that the emotional bond gives meaning to the physical act. It's what makes the experience something you cherish and remember, something that connects two people on a deep level. Zira leaned forward slightly, her eyes studying Michael carefully. I think I understand now. But how do humans know when they are ready for such a connection? Michael hesitated. That was a difficult question. There was no clear answer, no rulebook for knowing when someone was ready to form such a deep connection. It was different for everyone, and often it was a gradual process. Sometimes it just happens. It's when you meet someone who makes you feel complete, someone you can trust with your heart. Other times, it takes longer. You form a connection slowly, over time, through shared experiences. Zira's gaze softened. Humans are very complicated, she said quietly. Your emotions seem to be so intertwined with everything you do. I want to understand more, Michael. I want to understand this bond that you speak of. Michael felt a shift in the air. Zira's sincerity was evident, and the curiosity in her voice was more than just scientific. She was seeking something deeper, something meaningful. Michael couldn't help but feel both honored and burdened by her request. To guide her through such an intimate part of human experience was a heavy responsibility. I can only explain so much, Michael said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of the situation. The real understanding comes from experiencing it for yourself. But you have to be prepared. It's not just about physical sensations. It's about your heart, your emotions. It can be overwhelming. Zira nodded slowly. I understand. And I am prepared. I trust you, Michael. I trust you to help me experience this. Michael didn't know what to say. His feelings were mixed. He had never thought about guiding someone through such a personal experience. But Zira wasn't just any person. She was an alien, a being from another world, seeking to understand humanity in a way that no one had ever asked before. All right, he said finally. We'll take things slowly. We'll start with the emotional side first, just like we've been doing. I'll help you understand the feelings behind the connection. The physical side comes later, when you're ready. Zira's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, Michael. I am ready. The days that followed were filled with deep discussions and shared moments of reflection. Michael spoke about the role of trust, love, and companionship in human relationships. He explained how a person's heart and mind were just as important as their body in the act of reproduction. Zira listened intently, always asking questions that challenged his understanding and pushed him to explain things in new ways. At times, Michael felt like he was speaking about a world he had always known but never truly examined. The more he explained, the more he realized how complex and beautiful human relationships were. He had never thought about it in such depth. Zira's questions were opening his eyes to the significance of emotional connections in ways he hadn't considered before. One evening, after another long conversation, Zira sat quietly, her eyes distant as if lost in thought. Michael watched her, wondering what was going on inside her mind. Michael, she said softly, breaking the silence, I think I'm beginning to understand. It's not just about the physical. It's about the feelings, the emotions, the connection that forms between two beings. It's something beautiful, something fragile. Michael nodded, feeling a deep sense of appreciation for Zira's openness. Exactly. It's something precious. But it can also be difficult. Relationships are complex, and not everyone experiences them in the same way. That's why it's so important to respect the process and the emotions involved. Zira's smile was small but genuine. I feel like I've learned so much, but I also feel like there's still more to understand. The bond between humans, it's something I want to experience, to truly understand it. Michael took a deep breath. He knew the path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Zira was ready. And whatever the next steps were, they would have to be taken carefully and with great respect for what it meant to be human. As the days passed, Zara's curiosity about human relationships deepened. She began to ask more specific questions about emotions, love, and the way humans connect with each other. It was clear that she was not only learning but also experiencing a transformation within herself. Michael, too, felt a shift. What had started as a scientific exchange was now becoming something more intimate, something he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as they sat in the quiet of the lab, Zara spoke with a tone that was almost hesitant. "Michael, I've been thinking a lot about what we've discussed. About trust. About love. But I wonder, how do humans know when they truly love someone? How can you be sure that your feelings are real?" Michael paused, considering the question. It wasn't easy to explain something so personal, something that often defied logic. How did anyone know for sure? He looked at Zara, her violet eyes reflecting the quiet intensity of her thoughts. She wasn't asking out of curiosity anymore. She was seeking something deeper. "It's different for everyone," Michael said finally. "For some, it's an overwhelming feeling that hits them all at once. For others, it's something that grows slowly over time. But one thing is always the same. It's a feeling that you can't ignore. It's like your heart knows what your mind hasn't figured out yet." Zara nodded, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in her expression. And what if the other person doesn't feel the same way? What if the bond is only one-sided? Michael could sense the vulnerability in her words. This wasn't just a scientific inquiry anymore. Zara was grappling with something deeply human. Fear, uncertainty, the potential for heartbreak. It was a fear that Michael understood all too well. "That's the risk we take when we open ourselves up to someone," he said softly. "Love isn't always guaranteed, and it doesn't always work out the way you want. But it's worth it. Because when you truly love someone, you're willing to take that risk, even knowing there's no guarantee." Zara seemed to absorb his words, but her gaze drifted, lost in thought. Michael watched her, wondering what she was processing. It wasn't just the science of love she was trying to understand. It was the raw, emotional truth of it, the vulnerability that came with truly caring for someone. "I understand," Zara said after a long pause, her voice thoughtful. "But how do you know when it's time to share those feelings? How do you know when it's right to make that connection?" It was a question that Michael had never truly thought about in such terms. He had always assumed that the timing of such moments would simply feel right. But explaining that to someone who had never experienced it before was another challenge. "Sometimes you just know," Michael said. "It's like an instinct, a feeling in your gut. Other times, it's when you've built enough trust with someone, when you've shared enough of yourself with them. It's when the emotional connection is so strong that it becomes natural to take the next step. But there's no set rule. It's something you feel." Zara looked down at her hands, her fingers gently tapping against the table. She was deep in thought again, trying to piece together the pieces of this emotional puzzle. Michael couldn't help but admire her determination to understand, to experience what it meant to be human. What if I don't feel ready?" Zara asked quietly, almost to herself. "What if the feelings aren't enough? Or what if it's too soon?" Michael's heart went out to her. She wasn't just learning about human relationships. She was navigating her own emotions, her own desires. She was on the brink of something transformative, and he could sense her hesitation. "That's okay," Michael said gently. "You don't have to rush it. There's no need to force anything. The most important thing is that you're comfortable, that you're sure of your feelings. There's no right or wrong time. It's about what feels right for you." Zara's gaze lifted, and her eyes met his. There was something new in her look now, something deeper, more personal. "Thank you, Michael. I think I'm starting to understand. It's not just about the physical act. It's about trust, love, and connection." Michael smiled, relieved to see that Zara was starting to make sense of it all. "Exactly. It's about the bond you share with someone, the emotional connection that goes beyond just the physical. When that bond is strong, everything else falls into place." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The lab around them seemed to fade into the background as they both reflected on the journey they had been on together. Michael realized that, in helping Zira understand the human experience, he had also come to appreciate it more deeply himself. Zira broke the silence first, her voice soft but steady. "I think I'm ready, Michael. I'm ready to experience what you've been describing. The bond that comes with trust and love. I want to understand it for myself, in the way that humans do." Michael felt a surge of emotion. He had known this moment would come, but hearing Zira speak it aloud made it all the more real. He could see the determination in her eyes, the sincerity in her words. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice gentle but full of care. "This isn't something to take lightly. It's a big step, and it's not always easy." Zira nodded. "I'm sure. I trust you, Michael, and I want to experience it, to truly understand what it means to be human." Michael smiled, his heart warmed by her words. "Then let's take it one step at a time. We'll go at your pace, Zira, and we'll make sure you understand every part of it." And with that, they both knew that the next stage of their journey had begun. The journey of emotions, of trust, of connection. The journey that would take them into unknown territory. But together, the air in the lab felt different, almost charged with an unspoken anticipation. Michael and Zira had grown comfortable with their conversations, sharing thoughts and insights that bridged the gap between two vastly different worlds. But now, they were approaching a deeper understanding, one that neither had fully anticipated when their journey began. Zira stood by the holographic display, her delicate fingers tracing the glowing lines of a projection as if lost in thought. Michael watched her from across the room, sensing her inner conflict. Over the past days, she had become more introspective, asking fewer questions but spending more time processing their discussions. "Michael," Zira finally said, her voice steady but tinged with hesitation, "I've been thinking about everything we've talked about. The bond between humans, the emotions, and the trust. It's all so intricate." Michael set down the tablet he had been working on and walked over to her. "It is," he agreed. "But that's what makes it so powerful. It's not just about understanding it logically. It's about feeling it, experiencing it. That's what makes us human." Zira turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his. "Do you think I can feel it the way humans do? Or am I just trying to mimic something I can never truly grasp?" The vulnerability in her question caught Michael off guard. For all her intelligence and confidence, Zira was still exploring an entirely new realm of experience. He could see that she wasn't afraid of failure. She was afraid of not being genuine, of falling short in her efforts to connect. "I think you're already feeling it, Zira," Michael said gently. "Maybe not exactly the way a human would, but in your own way. Emotions aren't limited to humans. They're about connection, and you've been building that with every question you've asked and every step you've taken." Zira seemed to consider his words, her gaze softening. "Then perhaps it's time I take another step. You said emotions are about trust, about sharing yourself with someone. I want to try that." Michael nodded, understanding the gravity of her decision. "What kind of step are you thinking?" he asked, his tone encouraging but cautious. Zira hesitated for a moment, then said, "I've seen how humans share their emotions through physical gestures, holding hands, and embrace. These things seem simple, but they carry meaning. I'd like to try something like that." Michael smiled, appreciating her thoughtfulness. "We can start with something as simple as holding hands," he said, extending his hand toward her. "It's a way to show trust, to feel connected." Zira looked at his hand for a moment, then slowly reached out. Her fingers, warm and smooth, slipped into his, and they stood there, their hands intertwined. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight of significance. For Zira, it was an entirely new experience, a connection that went beyond words and logic. "What do you feel?" Michael asked after a few moments. "It's difficult to describe," Zira said, her voice thoughtful. There's warmth. Not just physical, but emotional. It's like a reassurance, a silent promise that I'm not alone. Michael nodded. That's a big part of it. Sometimes it's not about what you say. It's about being there for someone, letting them know you care. Zira smiled, a soft and genuine expression that lit up her face. I think I'm starting to understand. It's not just the act. It's the intention behind it. The feeling of trust and connection. They stood like that for a while, neither feeling the need to break the silence. For Michael, it was a moment of clarity. Zira wasn't just learning about humans. She was teaching him something as well. Her perspective, her openness to new experiences, reminded him of the value of connection, something he had taken for granted in his own life. Eventually, Zira let go of his hand, though the warmth of the moment lingered. Thank you, Michael, she said softly. This was meaningful, but I want to explore more, to understand how humans truly connect with each other. Michael could see the determination in her eyes, and he knew this was only the beginning. We'll take it one step at a time, he assured her. There's no rush. The journey is just as important as the destination. Zira nodded, but her expression turned thoughtful again. You've shared so much with me, Michael, but I realize I haven't shared much about myself. If we're building a connection, I think it's only fair that you know more about me. Michael leaned against the table, intrigued. I'd like that, Zira. Tell me more about your world, your people. What drives you? What do you care about? Zira hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. My people value logic and order above all else. Emotions are seen as distractions, something to be controlled or eliminated. But I've always been different. I've always felt things, even when I was told not to. That's why I volunteered for this mission, to understand humans, to explore emotions. I wanted to prove that there's more to existence than logic and rules. Michael listened intently, realizing how much courage it had taken for Zira to admit this. She wasn't just learning about humans. She was challenging her own beliefs, her own culture. You're braver than you realize, Zira, Michael said. Opening yourself up to something new, especially something as complex as human emotions, takes a lot of strength. Zira smiled again, this time with a hint of pride. Maybe. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, Michael. You've been patient, kind, and open. And for that, I'm grateful. As the day drew to a close, Michael and Zira felt a deeper bond forming between them. It was a connection built on trust, understanding, and a shared desire to explore the unknown. They both knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time, they felt ready to face them, together. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the research station. Inside, Michael and Zira were immersed in a conversation that had taken on a more personal tone. Over the past few days, Zira had opened up about her experiences, her struggles with her society's rigid expectations, and her journey toward understanding emotions. Michael listened intently as Zira shared her thoughts. Back on my homeworld, emotions were seen as a weakness, she explained. They were something to suppress, something that made you less efficient. I used to think the same way, but now I'm not so sure. Humans seem stronger because of their emotions, not in spite of them. Michael leaned back in his chair, considering her words. It's true that emotions can be messy, he admitted, but they give us purpose. They help us connect, inspire us to create, and push us to overcome challenges. Without them, we'd just be going through the motions of life. Zira nodded, her expression thoughtful. I see that now. But there's something I haven't told you, Michael, something I've been afraid to share. Michael's brow furrowed with concern. You can tell me anything, Zira. I won't judge you. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. When I was chosen for this mission, it wasn't because I was the best candidate. It was because I was different. My emotions set me apart, and my people didn't know what to do with me. This mission was their way of removing the problem. Michael's chest tightened at her words. They sent you away because you felt things. Because you didn't fit into their mold. Zira nodded. In their eyes, I was flawed. But I've come to see it differently. I think my emotions make me more complete. And now that I've spent time with you, I realize that understanding emotions isn't just about learning. It's about living. Michael reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. Zira, you're not flawed. You're unique, and that's something to be proud of. Your willingness to explore and grow is something many people, human or alien, could learn from. Zira looked at him, her violet eyes shimmering with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Thank you, Michael. Your kindness means more to me than I can say. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the soft chime of an alert. Michael glanced at the screen on his desk and frowned. It's a message from the main colony, he said. Zira tilted her head, curious. What does it say? Michael scanned the message, his expression growing serious. It's about you. They've detected your ship in orbit and are asking for an explanation. They want to know why you're here. Zira's posture stiffened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. If they discover I've been interacting with you, it could jeopardize everything. My people don't trust humans, and they certainly wouldn't approve of what I've been learning here. Michael's mind raced. We'll figure this out together, he said firmly. But we need to act quickly. Do you have a way to communicate with your ship? Zira hesitated before nodding. Yes, but I've kept it inactive to avoid detection. If I contact them now, they'll demand answers. Michael stood and began pacing, formulating a plan. We don't have to tell them everything, just enough to buy us time. You can say your ship malfunctioned and you had to land here for repairs. That's plausible, right? Zira considered his suggestion. It is, and it would explain why I've stayed on the planet. But what if they demand proof? Michael stopped pacing and looked at her. Then we'll give them proof. We can simulate a systems failure on your ship, something that looks convincing enough to back up your story. Zira's lips curved into a small smile. You're resourceful, Michael. It's one of the things I admire about humans. You always find a way to adapt. Michael grinned. It's a survival skill. Let's get to work. The two of them moved quickly, their shared determination driving them forward. Zira accessed her ship's remote interface while Michael analyzed its systems, searching for the best way to simulate a malfunction. Here, Michael said, pointing to a cluster of diagnostics on the screen. We can trigger a temporary power fluctuation in the communication array. It'll look like a hardware issue that caused you to lose contact with your ship. Zira nodded, impressed by his ingenuity. That should work. Let's implement it. As they worked together, Zira couldn't help but marvel at Michael's ability to think on his feet. His willingness to help her, even at potential risk to himself, reinforced the bond they had been building. After an hour of meticulous adjustments, they completed the simulation. Zira initiated the remote sequence, and her ship responded with a convincing series of error codes. It's done, she said, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Now we just have to hope they believe it. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They will. And if they don't, we'll deal with it together. Zira looked at him, a sense of calm washing over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't facing her challenges alone. As they waited for a response from her ship, the connection between them deepened. They weren't just two beings from different worlds. They were allies, partners, and perhaps something more. The soft hum of the research station's systems filled the room as Zira and Michael waited for the response from her ship. Tension hung in the air, but there was also an unspoken understanding between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. A chime from Zira's communicator broke the silence. Her ship had sent a message. She glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she opened the communication. The message was brief and formal, as was typical of her people. It acknowledged the malfunction report and instructed Zira to remain on the planet until the issue could be resolved remotely. Relief washed over her. "They believe it," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and gratitude. Michael grinned. "I told you we'd figure it out." Zira placed the communicator on the table and looked at him. "You've done more than just help me, Michael. You've shown me a different way to think, to feel. For that, I'll always be grateful." Michael shrugged modestly. "I think we've both learned a lot from each other. You've taught me that no matter how different we might seem, there's always common ground if we're willing to look for it." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by another alert, this time from the station's main system. Michael frowned and moved to the console. "It's a message from the colony," he said, reading it quickly. "They're asking if you're safe and if we need assistance." Zira's expression shifted to one of concern. "What should we tell them? If they come here and see me, it could complicate things." Michael thought for a moment before typing a response. "I'll tell them everything's under control and that the situation is resolved. They trust me enough not to ask too many questions." Zira watched him work, her admiration for his calm and decisive nature growing. "You really are remarkable, Michael. Your people are lucky to have someone like you." He glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "And I'm lucky to have met you, Zira. You've given me a new perspective on what's possible." The message was sent, and Michael turned back to Zira. "There, that should keep them satisfied for now. But we still have a lot to figure out." Zira nodded. "Yes, but at least we have time. And time is a valuable thing." Over the next few days, Zira and Michael worked together to repair her ship and ensure it would be ready for her eventual return. The process was a blend of human ingenuity and alien technology, and it highlighted the unique strengths of both species. As they worked, their bond deepened. They shared stories, laughed at each other's misunderstandings, and found joy in the simple act of working toward a common goal. One evening, as they sat under the stars, Michael spoke. "You know, when you leave, things are going to feel quieter around here." Zira looked at him, her expression soft. "I'll miss this too. But I hope this isn't the end. Maybe one day, our worlds will find a way to connect on a larger scale. And maybe we've taken the first step toward that." Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the sky. "I'd like to think so. And no matter what happens, I'll always remember this." The day of Zira's departure arrived sooner than either of them had expected. Her ship, now fully operational, was ready to take her back to her people. As they stood by the landing pad, Zira hesitated. "Michael, I want you to have something." She reached into a pouch at her side and handed him a small glowing crystal. "This is a token from my world. It's a reminder that no matter how far apart we are, we'll always be connected." Michael accepted the crystal, his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you, Zira. I'll keep this safe, and I hope you know that you're always welcome here." Zira smiled, a mix of sadness and hope in her expression. "And you'll always have a friend among the stars." As she stepped onto her ship, Michael felt a pang of loss, but also a deep sense of gratitude. Meeting Zira had changed his life in ways he couldn't fully articulate, and he knew the same was true for her. The ship's engines roared to life, and Michael watched as it ascended into the sky, disappearing into the vast expanse of space. For a moment, the world felt still. Then Michael looked at the crystal in his hand and smiled. Zira might be gone, but her impact would remain. A reminder that even in the vastness of the universe, connections could be forged and barriers could be broken. As he turned to head back to the station, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning.